Welcome to the HIVE. My name's Andrew Woods. I'm the manager of this new facility. The HIVE stands for the Hub for Immersive Visualisation and eResearch. It's a new facility in the university intended to support and encourage visualisation and virtualisation and simulation aspects related to all things visual. Primary aim is to encourage research outputs in this field, and it's seen as a field of great opportunity and great potential for enabling us to do things a lot better. As I mentioned, it's a new facility. We launched on the 27th of November, and we're still in the process of commissioning, so there's still a lot to do. I might just provide you with a quick rundown of the 4 displays we have here. These are the most obvious part of the HIVE, the 4 visualisation systems. Each of them have their own characteristics and allow visualisation to be done in a range of different ways. The first of the displays is what's known as the tile display. It's a media wall is another way of describing it. It's a 10 square metre area of LCD panels, bigger than some people's swimming pools, and over that area we have 24 million pixels. The wall is made up of 12 full HD LCD panels, media grade panels, with a very small border around the side so that they can be joined together very closely. There's a whole manner of different types of content that can be shown on here, and we don't have enough time to go through all of those different options right at this moment. The next display on your right is called the cylinder. It's a 3 metre high screen, 8 metre diameter curved screen. When you're standing in the central point, it fills 180 degree of your field of view. This can run in stereoscopic 3D using the provided 3D glasses over there. The screens are filled with 3 projectors which are mounted from the ceiling there, and this can be used for a range of different topics and tasks, including virtual environments, which we've got here illustrating a project on the HMAS Sydney which we're working on. The screen behind you is called the wedge. It's 2 rear projected screens mounted at 90 degrees to each other. Those screens can be angled outwards to form a flat screen as well. 2.8 metre diagonal, full HD resolution on each display, and can also be run in stereoscopic 3D. So we're anticipating that screen there would be used for visualisation of volumetric data or business data, for example, too, or viewing of stereoscopic content. There's a demo loop there. There's a set of a whole heap of glasses there sitting on the small podium there. So please, once the session's finished, please come through and have a look at that screen as well. Each of the screens, the glasses only work on that particular screen. So these 2 are stereoscopic, these 2 aren't. The screen on your left here is known as the dome, or it's actually a half dome, 4 metre diameter, and when you stand at the apex of the screen, it fills your full peripheral and primary vision. So when you come in here, don't stand too close. We don't want you walking up the screen, for example. The purpose of today's session is to talk about data visualisation, primarily looking at business data sets. We've invited ThoughtWorks onto campus to present on this topic. I want to be clear that we're not endorsing their work. They're just providing an illustration of what is possible. They have some very good illustrations of visualisation and what it is capable of. They also have done a range of work with some groups on campus as well. So I will now hand over to David and also give you a microphone.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, and the first baton change of the afternoon. So as Andrew said, we're here today to talk about some organisations we've worked with and the benefits that they've realised through data visualisation. And we'll also talk a bit about the approach that we've tended to use there, which is quite a lightweight and rapid approach to reaching a visualisation. So Before we go any further, I'll just make sure I introduce the two of us properly. I'm David Coles, and my colleague
Ray Grasso,
and
consultants at ThoughtWorks.
And ThoughtWorks is a software product development consultancy. So we're based here in Perth, but ThoughtWorks is a global group. So I guess the key thing is visualisation is used for a purpose. And what sort of problems do people solve with visualisation? Well, one of the earliest examples takes us back to Victorian London and the middle of a cholera outbreak. And some of you might be familiar with this. In the 1850s, over 600 people died in a cholera outbreak. And John Snow was seeking to understand why. And to do that, he drew a picture from the data. He collected data about where the deaths had occurred, and for each house or each location along the street where there was a death, he drew a black bar to indicate where people had been dying. And this, as he put this picture together, it quickly became clear that there was a problem near the Broad Street water pump. And using this visualisation, he was able to convince the authorities to remove the handle of that water pump. It was able to convince them that that was the source of the cholera infection. And this was before there was even a mechanism that could be understood for transmitting cholera from a water pump. It would be another 7 years before Louis Pasteur introduced the theory of germs. And then the prevailing wisdom at the time was that cholera was spread by miasma, or bad air. So this was a pretty good outcome for a drawing based on some numbers. And he was subsequently able to convince the authorities that dumping raw sewage into the public water supply was a bad idea. So a great legacy of public hygiene from that particular data visualisation. But if we come back to the present day, then we see that all sorts of organisations are using visualisation for all sorts of purposes. Corporations, governments, NGOs, formal and informal alliances of all of those, and individuals participating in hackathons and similar activities, trying to combine data sets and produce meaning from them, especially where they're complex and unstructured and difficult to understand. And why are people trying to visualise this data? Well, it's because it has a number of advantages for us as human beings. Visualised data is easy to understand because it engages our innate cognitive mechanisms. It's also the case that once you've understood a data visualisation, you can use it to pursue further investigation. So once you know what it's showing you, you can use it to interrogate whether it's showing you what you expect. It's a shared view, so with a visualisation that's shared among a group, the entire group can focus its energies on making that picture better rather than disagreeing on what the picture should look like. It's a holistic summary. You might say that nothing gives you the big picture like a big picture. And it also provides new insight. So you might set out to create a visualisation that will show you certain things, but you can be pretty much guaranteed that you'll see new things in the process of producing that visualisation. And for those reasons, for the reasons that visualisation is good for people, it's good for business because business runs on people. But in particular, we've seen with our clients that they're looking at two major outcomes from data visualisation. And one of those is to increase engagement, to produce compelling communications or build brand awareness with an audience that might be external, or it might be internal, or it might be a combination of both. And they're also using visualisation to try and gain insight into their operations, to have a very lightweight approach to drilling into complex data and seeing what leaps out as opportunities for improvement. But to talk about engagement, I will hand the baton over to Ray.
Here we go. So as Dave mentioned, kind of one of the themes, I guess, that we've found with some of our clients on reasons they're using data visualization is around increasing engagement. In the first case we'll look at is increasing engagement via telling a story over a complex set of data. You know, what is inherently a complex story, trying to tell that in a really simple fashion. And so the client we're speaking about are the independent market operator, or the IMO. For those who don't know who they are, the IMO, one of their responsibilities is to operate and develop the wholesale electricity market of Western Australia. So big producers of energy and big purchasers of energy, they operate in these various markets trading sums of energy. And the IMO's job is to facilitate that. And so when we first spent time with the IMO sort of discussing the data in their world, I mean, they sit on a lot of different data across these different markets, and they have a lot of different stakeholders, both in the government and in the public and within the industry itself. And the kind of approach that they had taken up to that point for presenting this data was kind of this style of presentations. This is something we pulled straight from their website when we first got there. You know, it's a static graph showing, you know, a bunch of figures and forecast lines and things like that. For the sort of people within the market, there's probably a certain level of engagement with the raw numbers, but for a lot of the average people, they sort of see this and eyes kind of glaze over and they sort of move on. So I'd just like to cover the approach that we went through with the IMO in sort of one of the specific pieces of the project that we did with them in taking this data and trying to get the engagement up and increasing it with their audience. And this is sort of the broad sweeps of the process. So there was a sort of broad question that started the whole project really. Then there was a data discovery portion where you're really digging into the numbers to actually see if it backs up the proposition, and then really rapidly refining a solution to communicate a visualization over this data. And the broad question that started the overall project really was just a hunch, and it was actually a conversation with the CEO of the IMO, and he basically effectively said, some of the big players in the market are doing some weird things with their trades. It's unusual. See if we can tell that story and show that story to people. So you kind of take a step back from that and go, well, that's pretty broad. Like, what does that mean? And so the first reaction and the first step that we would generally recommend is to sort of dig into the data to try and see what this story is, if this is actually a story. And so that's what we did. We grabbed a lot of the information straight from their core systems, threw it out into really simple files like CSV files that we could look in Excel and stuff like that. This is sort of where we started. So we kind of graphed out all the different participants. So each of those coloured lines is a different a generator or retailer. At the top there, it shows their total volume of trading in this particular market. And this one here shows who sold energy into the market, and the bottom one shows who bought energy from the market. So you look at that, and it's still really noisy and doesn't really say much. So the exploration kind of continues. And so these are sort of snapshots along the process that we took. So here you can sort of see now we've broken it out for an individual participant. So there's 2 participants there. Sort of the green bit above is how much energy they're selling into the market. The red below the line is how much they're buying. These are quantities, and this is a sort of over time since the inception of the market. So you start to get a bit more of a sense of who's doing what. It's a bit easier to dissect, but the story still wasn't quite there. So we sort of split that graph out even further. So now we've got it broken down by the hour. So you can sort of see each trading interval as sort of roughly an hour and the volumes that they're trading in that time. And at the top there is the largest generator, so effectively the largest, who you would expect to be the largest seller of energy into the market. And here is the largest retailer, so effectively who you expect to buy the most energy out of the market. And there's something interesting about this. Now, it won't be immediately interesting to you guys generally, but you can sort of see here from about midway through 2012, the largest generator of power started buying lots and lots of power, and the largest retailer of power started selling lots and lots of power. And they were doing it overnight, so basically from 10 o'clock in the evening till 7 in the morning. And if you look at these two, they effectively reflect each other. So with this sort of high-level visualization, you can get a sense of what was going on. And so at this point, we knew that, okay, there is some interesting trading behaviour here that would be useful to actually illustrate. We kind of worked out that there is a narrative behind this. And so at that point, there's where we really switch gears into that sort of final sort of solution part of the process. Here it's really about shifting into the communication realm rather than sort of the data digging realm. So you have a story now, how do you effectively communicate that story? So you start with paper, lots of brainstorming and sketching and ideas, like how can we show these different players and the volumes that they're contributing or taking from the market. once we sort of had a general direction we wanted to go in, then we really went into sort of solution realm. So the channel here that we were working with was the web, so via the public website. So we were working in HTML, JavaScript, CSS, typical web technologies. And our approach is really just to, with the IMO, is to build the solution and iterate it as we go, rather than kind of, you know, Photoshop it up and imagine it as an ideal and then come to implementation and work out that it wouldn't actually be implementable. So that's the approach we took. And this is a sort of snapshot of different milestones or points along the evolution. So we kind of had this this sense of the market at the center and the different participants sort of around the edges and the different volumes of energy that they were contributing or taking from the market as sort of flowing out from there. And so as they started to evolve that kind of resonated with a lot of the folks we were talking to, but we realized that we needed to kind of anchor it in time a bit more. Just having a single snapshot was difficult for people to know where they were. So we added this timeline type presentation on the left, which you sort of saw from before. So here you can sort of get a high level snapshot view over time, and you can sort of drag in and see the individual trading volumes. And so what we finally end up with, come over to the right side over here, was this presentation piece in the middle. So here we have this kind of selector or this little window, this monthly window over the duration of the market. And on the right, you can see the market in the middle and the different volumes from the different participants around the edge. So, for instance, in September, you can see the largest generator there at the top buying a really large amount of energy out of the market. And the largest retailer there, that was almost magical, wasn't it? Selling it. I'll see if I can scroll this up a bit. Oh, there we go. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of information within this single visualization. And it's a theme that you'll see again when we get into the portion that Dave will speak about. Once you get sort of once you can navigate this, once you understand the layout of what you're seeing, you can actually consume a lot of data really quickly, and you can sort of interact with it and explore it in a way that just a table of figures and a static graph just doesn't allow you to do. And so if we come back, that was, again, an example where one of our clients were using data visualization to try and get this information out to their different stakeholders, getting more engagement with people. Second case is really around amplifying engagement. So again, this whole idea of using data visualization to get people closer to the data and to the organisation. And this client is basically the folks from the Desert Fireball Network, or Fireballs in the Sky, if you haven't heard of them, based here in Curtin. Phil's right there from the DFN. Hey Phil, Curtin's own. So for those who don't know what the DFN is about, and Phil, don't throw stuff at me if I butcher this. Meteors fly into the sky and they sometimes explode into fireballs. And the Desert Fireball Network is basically a network of cameras throughout the Australian outback, poised on the sky, taking long exposure photographs continuously. And then Phil and his team afterwards take those photographs and use the fireballs in them and the positions of the cameras to basically get the trajectory of these fireballs, to work out if they've maybe hit the ground and maybe where they've come from. And that can lead to expeditions where you're actually trying to recover the meteorites or calculating where they come from. And the reason that geologists like Phil do this is because this kind of information can help make us understand more about the origins of the universe. So it's pretty grand stuff. It's pretty inspirational. You can see, I don't know, is that running with the live one? But there was different shots there. So this is like a time lapse of some of the camera images in the spherical screen over there. So it's really interesting stuff. So when we first sat down with the Fireballs team, it was really to talk about a brief for a smartphone app. So really grand ideas, and now we're talking about a smartphone app. The smartphone app, the main idea of it was really about bringing the general public sort of closer to the science and sort of almost an outreach, engagement, awareness piece. And there's a really interesting piece to this where it was about actually engaging citizens in the science itself. So one of the core features of the application you can see is described here. And it really was the use case where someone's out in, say, somewhere in Perth, in the night sky, they see a fireball, they pull out their phone with the app, they tap where it started, they tap where it ended, they record a bit of information about it, and that information goes off to the DFN folks. And if you get enough of these folks seeing the same fireball, it could help actually contribute data to basically complement what was already in the DFN. And so this core sort of flow is sort of pretty simple, and you can sort of see there, a fireball's a pretty spectacular thing, but the information that describes it's actually fairly mundane. You kind of have elevation, you have azimuth, you have, with the duration in seconds, you really just have a lot of numbers effectively. And so as we were sort of exploring this, when we were working it out, it was like, if someone actually sees this, how are they going to describe it? Are they going to be saying, oh yeah, it was like a -4 magnitude of brightness, oh, it's a 12-degree elevation here, and there's about 2.2 of a second long. Like, that just wasn't realistic. What you're more likely to get is someone to say something like that. Like, it broke up and it was kind of green and it went in this direction. And so that core idea of can we put something together where people are interacting with this information, and this is really about authoring information, authoring data, kind of coalesced in this first version where you would basically build your own fireball. So this would be part of the capturing. So once you've tracked where it was, you would come in there and you would set the color of it, you would set the shape, and how many pieces, and all this kind of good stuff. And this animation would update, well, it does update, I've got it on my phone, I'll show you afterwards, in place, and you could see that. And it was a much more engaging way to get people to actually give you the information, rather than going through a long, boring form. So after that first milestone, that first release, we kind of asked the question, can we do better in other parts of the application? And two other parts of the application that we looked at was really that capture piece and the sighting sort of viewing. So the capture piece is that, as you can see in release 1, was just a big button. So it was like it started there and it ended there. It was quite static. And the sighting piece, like showing a sighting, was really just showing the textual information and just like a static map of where they saw it. So we did do better with the great help of the folks at the DFN and Fireballs in the Sky. And so the capture process became this sort of live heads-up display and then an actual star map behind it. So you can see there, these dots here are a star map, and based on where the person's sitting and the orientation of the device, we would overlay in the sort of augmented reality way the stars that they should be seeing behind there. It became a much more immersive experience, and something that was actually just a standalone part of the app. I'll sort of wave it in front of you right now. So for folks who can see that, you can sort of see it sort of live updating. You can sort of see the horizon. There's all the stars there. And you've got that heads-up display. And as you sort of go to capture, it draws out the path like that. And then you get into your building of the fireball. So it's a much more immersive experience than just tapping those two dots. And then on the sighting screen itself, rather than just showing those static attributes on their own, there was also this animated fireball over the star map as it would have been captured. So again, here you've sort of, both on the consumption side and on almost the production side, you're really trying to up the engagement and get people to engage with the app in a way that they otherwise might not. So those are two examples within sort of the whole sort of business goal, I guess, of organisational goal of increasing engagement. I'll hand back over to Dave to talk about operational insight.
Thanks, Ray. Oops. So I guess, yeah, the next main case that we'll be looking at is gaining operational insight, and I guess you might summarise that as trying to pick up something that sticks out like a sore thumb as a starting point. And something that stuck out like a sore thumb to John Snow was the fact that nobody died in the brewery, which was just down the street from the from the water pump, but that was because all the monks in there spent all day drinking beer. How times have changed. But when you need a big, this case is about when you need a big picture view to I guess kind of spot what doesn't look right. And for this case, we go to a call centre, and a call centre where there's a big improvement program, and the performance of the call centre is measured in terms of customer satisfaction, which is assessed by NPS or Net Promoter Score, and by how much it costs to run the call centre, or operational expense. So those are the two key measures of the performance of the call centre from the organisation's perspective. And the improvement program is looking to achieve a balanced improvement in both of those. But it's a big call centre. It's really big. It's 200,000 calls a day. They're dealt with by 10,000 agents who are across multiple countries and time zones. And there are 500 or more products. No one's really sure how many products are actually supported by the call centre. It's a bit like that. It operates 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And this presents the challenge. We're trying to improve this enormous call centre, but we have trouble picturing what it looks like now because it's so big and so diverse that we can't really get a good handle on how to start the improvement process, or even what looks particularly wrong about it that needs to be improved. We have some metrics around queue sizes and around wait times, and we have some levers that we can pull and push, but it's not really going to, that sort of small scale fiddling isn't really going to achieve the objectives of this program. So in this case we set out to draw a picture of the call centre, and much like Ray showed with the evolution of the short-term energy market, this was an evolving process, and it's quite fascinating looking into that, but we're going to skip right to the end product in this case. And this is the end product. This is the picture we drew of a call centre. It might not immediately strike you as a call centre, but maybe when I talk you through it, you might see the reasoning behind it. This is actually a point in time at the call centre. So this is about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it shows all of the calls that are active in the call centre at this time. So there are about 3,000 calls active in the call centre, and each one of those is represented by a character on the screen, one of the katakana characters. The calls can be in basically one of two states. They can be in a queue, so you've just called up, you've entered a few things with your voice or with the phone keypad, and now you're listening to hold music. In that case, then you're in a queue, and that would mean you're in the orange section at the top of the screen. The longer you stay in the queue, the further down that orange section your call progresses. When the call is answered, then you're in, and it's a customer talking to an agent, then it's in the green section lower down the screen. And again, the longer the call has progressed, the further down the screen the call moves. Different types of calls or inquiries by customers are shown from left to right across the screen. So the horizontal position determines the nature of the call. So on top of this, there are some things that we can also show that we know both upset customers and lead to increased operational expense. The thing that upsets customers is if they hang up. One thing that upsets customers is hanging up in the queue. So we've shown calls that hang up in the queue with an exploding bubble. So those are where customers have hung up. And another thing that upsets customers is being transferred from one agent to another, because typically you have to go back into the queue again, and that's shown with the diagonal lines that go from a conversation with an agent back up to a queue for a different call type. So that's a picture of just a slice of time in the middle of the morning at the call centre, but that's not even the biggest picture. I guess that's still a small picture. What we can do is actually come over here to the cylindrical display, and we can watch the whole day in the call centre unfold. So we'll go back in time a little bit to start at about 7 o'clock in the morning now in the call centre, and we're running a lot faster than real time. So we're running at 128 times real speed, and we can see all of the things that we saw in the static image over there. But I'll just talk you through them again where it's live. So when we set out to draw this picture of the call centre, these are the things we expected to see. We expected to see calls arriving. In this case, these are bill inquiries arriving in the queue for bill inquiry calls. We expected to see them progressing through that queue, and as you can see they're moving down the screen there as they progress. And we can also see the abandons where customers are hanging up in the queue up there. When an agent's available, then the call is transferred through to that agent, and we can see calls being answered by agents in the lower part of the screen. Again, these are all billing inquiry calls as they progress through their life cycle. And again, we're moving through the life cycle of that call, progressing down the screen. So we can see billing inquiries there. We can see a different type of call over here. We can see fault reports coming in over here. And right over on the side over here, which some of you might be able to see, we can see inquiries about fixed line moves. So we can also see transfers in and out of the call, in and out of a particular call type. So here, sales inquiries are presumably going to other areas that relate to the product rather than a general sales inquiry, and other calls are resulting in a sales inquiry of some sort coming into this queue. So those are the transfers. Those are the things we expected to see, but then there were a bunch of things that we didn't set out expecting to see, but we saw once we looked at the visualisation. And the first of those was that some types of demand that we would have expected in the call centre just were non-existent. We would have expected people were calling about iPhones, but there is zero demand in that 200,000 set of calls for iPhones, which is quite an unusual finding. And it's not one that we can necessarily answer with this visualisation, but at least we've found an interesting question to ask to understand how we could improve operations. To actually answer that question, we need to go somewhere else, and we need to dig into the data, and we need to use different tools and a different approach. But this is very powerful at identifying what that question should be, a question that needs further investigation. Another question that might occur that probably doesn't need so much investigation is why no one's calling about blackberries. That one's probably a bit easier to explain. We also found, again over here on this side of the screen, that there were calls coming in for business inquiries, but there were no agents there to handle them. So that's not really a good outcome from a customer experience or even from a business point of view. That all of those customers are just hanging up in frustration before they get to speak to anyone. So another thing that we saw was kind of subtle, but once you've seen it, then you can't help noticing it. And that is that these queues are supposed to be fairly orderly. The call that's been in the queue the longest is supposed to be the one that's answered first. But what you can see here is that there are calls that are spending a long time in the queue, but despite that, there are new calls being answered by agents before the calls are taken out of the queue. So you can see calls rapidly falling down in green past the orange calls that are moving very slowly in the queue. And that was an interesting finding, because that's not actually how it works in reality. It turned out that there was an issue with the way the data was being processed. So there was a large amount of processing going on between the source systems and actually a single view of this data of the call centre. And in that processing, there were errors that were making it look like calls were jumping the queue when in fact they weren't. So, but the rub here is that this same data was being used to make operational decisions in the magnitude of millions of dollars a year. So it was very important to ensure that it's quality data, and a visualisation like this helps us uncover whether there are issues that we might not otherwise find. And the final one was an interesting finding around transfers. So we might expect that, and here customers are calling with a help request. We might expect that calls are transferred if customers call with two different types of inquiries, in which case it's a legitimate transfer once the first inquiry is completed. It might be that the automated system that classifies calls gets it wrong sometimes, which it does. And in that case, an agent should quickly realise, and there should be a transfer from high up the talking area into a different queue type, which is the actual call inquiry. But what we didn't expect to see was calls being transferred within the same type. We didn't expect to see calls being sent to agents who later said, actually, I can't deal with this. But it has been classified correctly. And so this is a great opportunity to improve the performance of the call centre, to eliminate unnecessary transfers and to eliminate unnecessary cost by ensuring that calls only get to agents that can deal with them properly. And I could talk about this all day, and we will leave it up once we're finished, but I'll hand back over to Ray for now to bring us on home, and that means another pattern change.
Okay, so we'll just wrap up with a few takeaways, I guess. So these, there's learnings that we've had in the course of the work we've been able to do with our clients, and a few of those pieces we'd like to just leave you with now. So we've covered the benefits. It's probably worth just quickly talking about them again. So there's, data visualization can be really useful in presenting complex information simply. sort of efficiency of understanding is another way of thinking about that, I guess. It can be used to make interacting with data something that's almost exciting, a bit more visceral. So whether it's like the Fireballs instance where, you know, the capturing of the data or the actual reading of the data, the consuming, can be a much more, you know, engaging experience. And then for the call center example, you know, using these high-level sort of holistic, fuzzy visualizations over really complex sets of data can help sort of lead you to ask more questions where you can do sort of more pointed investigations and take more pointed actions. So what are the kinds of triggers you might find in your day-to-day work, I guess, within whatever organisations you're a part of, that might be a twig for you to think, okay, maybe this is an instance where data visualisation could be used. We've kind of covered this a little bit, but like if there's a complex story to tell, there's complex data behind it, but you have the data is there. If there isn't a shared picture, certainly within an operational sense, but you have the data is there again. You have the data, but it's boring to use, like it's boring to look at or it's boring to create. Maybe there's an opportunity there for using these kind of techniques. And finally, when it comes to execution, so when it comes to building these kinds of things, the approaches that we generally recommend are starting small, and that's both within the scale of what you're trying to achieve and also within the teams that you have, and stay really lightweight. Use real data throughout, so there'll be a lot of truisms that people will hold, and even people with a lot of experience can be proved wrong when you actually get into the information. So definitely use real data as early as possible and use it throughout. And refine and adapt. So none of these visualizations that we've seen, the endpoint wasn't clear from day one. It was really an evolution and an exploration. I mean, all of the solutions we've seen, they're all custom software, custom created, and they all took on the order of weeks to complete. So with that, I guess ask Dave to stand back up and say thank you. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to hear them.